Welcome to the Straight Red Card, and this is Derek Richey and Brett Corbett, and we're going to talk a little about, not just about the World Football Challenge, because that would leave out other teams that are over here right now playing against MLS teams like Ajax, like Everton, like West Brom, like Bolton. So we're not going to leave those guys out of the discussion because they're part of what MLS teams are taking on right now. So this just isn't just a World Football Challenge conversation, but there were a lot of people who are very frustrated about the World Football Challenge, Brett. They think it's a waste of time. They think it's a waste of energy. And I think Bruce Arena even said in an interview, hey, you know, this whole setup is just it's placating to the visiting teams, but what it doesn't take into account are all the things that my team, LA Galaxy, needs to get ready for and prepare for during the season. So it's not to our benefit to even play these things. Brett, what do you think?
Well, you know, he has a good point because I mean it's in the mid-season, it's in the middle of our season. We have extra. Basically, what we have is we have extra games to play. We can't start our reserves to give them the extra time because we're concerned about the score line. I mean, we saw that with the Seattle Man U game. I mean, they started. Oh, yeah. I mean, they played well for the first half. They got 1-0 with the starters result. Yeah, yep. And then they put in their reserves, and all of a sudden it's a 7-0 game. I mean, that looks absolutely terrible for MLS. And that's a big concern. We don't want our teams getting blown out by these teams, but in the end, we also don't want to have to start our starters and play them the entire game, especially when you have to turn over and play an actual MLS game. I mean, you look at LA, who's contending for the Supporter Shield again. I mean, you throw in all these international friendlies, and their starters are having to play extra games. They're going to be tired. They're prone to injury. I mean, it's just it's a hassle for these teams, and I can understand the idea that they bring in money. It's a cash flow idea. You know, you bring in these really great teams. You get fans out, see the team play. Hopefully your team puts on a good show. And in the end, maybe you pull in a couple extra fans saying, hey, I had a great time at that game. I'm going to go back to another one. And maybe it steamrolls from there. But in the end, I'm not an overly huge fan of these, especially when they're in the middle of the season like this, because it interrupts the MLS season, especially the teams that are contending. There are some teams that aren't contending that might love these because they get to see the high-profile teams and they get to see their team play them. But yeah. I have to side with Bruce here because it is an inconvenience, really.
Well, then again, let's a few things, Brett. Number one, I think Alexi Lalas made a really good point today when he said the thing about these World Football Challenge games is you can watch Sky Sports, and they had it all over Sky Sports. Man U crushes Seattle 7-0. All right, but here again, I mean that's one problem with it. The other thought is, however, are the teams that we have playing the World Football Challenge doing the right things? For instance, what Bruce Arena did today against Man City, that made a lot of sense. What he did was basically split his starters in half. He had half of his starters start the first half, and the other half of his starters finish the second half. So he didn't have, like a lot of the other MLS teams are doing, they start their starting lineup for the first half, and then they throw in a bunch of rookies to the Wolves in the second half, which is what happened to Seattle, where they get slaughtered. I mean, use some freaking common sense here. And that's what I'm talking about. A lot of the teams aren't using any common sense. They're starting their starters. New England did this too in the first half, all of them. And then they put in scrubs. I'm sorry to say that. They're young kids. They're not ready. They're inexperienced. They're not ready for this. So they put in the scrubs, if you will, in the second half, and they get completely demolished. But another thing I have to bring up is we haven't been crushed. People use the 7 7-0 game versus Man United, Seattle as some sort of example. Let me. What I call a blowout, Brett, is any game that the other team beats you by 3 goals. Okay, the only 3 games where teams have been beaten out of the, I'd say, 17 games so far, games we played as international friendlies, within and without the World Football Challenge. The only times we've been crushed, Seattle got beat 7-0, sure. LA got beat by Real Madrid 4-1, and New England got beat 4-1 by Man United as well. Outside of that, it hasn't been as horrible as we think it has been, because a lot of the games where we've actually performed well, they're not televised, they're not talked about.
Yep.
So we don't know that San Jose beat West Brom, except for the fact that it was a ridiculous goal by the goalie. We don't, we don't know that the Philadelphia Union beat Everton 1-0. We don't know that Kansas City tied Newcastle 0-0. No one talks about that. All we hear about is the 7-0 loss to Man United. And the other thing about the Supporters' Shield that you mentioned, really, let me just put it this way. LA Galaxy's going to make the playoffs, right?
Oh, of course.
Does it really matter if they win the Supporters' Shield or not? Because there's nothing for that. There's no reward for finishing first. So they already made the playoffs, right? So who cares?
There is a reward.
What is it?
Straight. It's the same thing as winning the MLS Cup. I mean, they get the automatic admission into the CONCACAF Champions League. That's the big one right there. Right?
Oh, well, that's such a huge thing for MLS teams. They really care about that a lot, obviously.
Some do. I'm not sure if LA does, and hopefully they do.
That really helped LA this year in the CONCACAF Cup when they fell to what?
Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this coming up CONCACAF Champions League, they perform a little bit better. But I'm just saying there is some incentive to winning the Supporters' Shield. Of course, winning the MLS Cup is by far. There's more incentive.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. But jumping back to what we were talking about the score lines and stuff. But let's not let the score lines fool us here. Despite my disliking of these midseason international friendlies, I mean, Seattle was down 1-0 to Man U at halftime. Then they throw in their subs, and then they go down 7-0.
Right.
New England was tied 0-0 against Man U.
It was an ugly 0-0, but you're right.
Then they put in their subs, and it came out to a 4-1 game, right?
Right.
And to bring up a game you haven't mentioned, because this is a recent on my mind because we just watched it last night. Chicago played Man U.
Right.
Actually went up on them 1-0 at halftime.
Yep.
And what I liked about Klopas is the same thing as you mentioned that Bruce did. Unlike what Bruce did, where he put half starters in, half reserves. Half starters came in, half reserves came in later. Klopas actually played it like an actual game where he started his starters and he brought in players as the game went on rather than subbing mass subs.
Yeah.
He wanted to make it a game. He wanted to make it interesting, see what would happen. And there were some subs that I wouldn't have put in this match, but you know what? Why not give them the experience? But Chicago outshot Man U. It was like 15-6 in the first half.
Yep.
We could have been up 5-0, 4-0.
Oh, if Husidic in the second half wouldn't have been a blind mouse. I mean, literally, I could have hit that in with my butt cheeks. All I would have to do is turn around and just jut it out, and it would have gone in the goal.
Not only that, but we hit the post a couple times. Their teenage keeper made a fantastic foot save. It was fortunate that the balls hit right at him, but nothing taken away from him. It was a nice save. And every missed opportunity, I was screaming at myself, saying, "Oh my God, we're going to get punished. We're going to get punished for this." And what happened? Came in, they brought in Rooney, they brought in Giggs, and we got punished.
Yep.
It was still a great game to watch, and I know a lot of fans that went to it that enjoyed it thoroughly, and that I'm sure they're going to be back for future games.
Yep.
And that's something to take from this. It's not always. Don't worry. We need to stop worrying about the score lines. Although the 7-0s,
that was bad.
Are devastating to see. If you look at the actual game itself, it's not like we're being destroyed completely. It's just whenever we put in our depth, and that's been the big problem with MLS is our depth in comparison, because it's not as experienced, it's not talented enough to compete here. but this is a great experience for them, and that's all you can say about it.
That's why Bruce Arena made the right move. That's why Bruce Arena didn't, start with all his starters in the first half and then put in all his backups and reserves in the second half. He mixed it up. It made a lot more sense. I don't know what other teams are thinking. I don't know what other coaches and managers of all the other MLS teams are thinking, but you can't do a starter / then scrub lineup in first and then second half. It's stupidity. And what we want to avoid, which I think we have avoided, which has not been in the news, is complete devastation. We talk about, again, the Seattle loss, the 7-0 loss, but you look at these scores, all right? DC United lost to Ajax 1-2. You look at it, Portland lost to West Brom 2-3. They lost to Ajax, 0-2. Vancouver lost to Man City 1-2. I mean, these aren't horrible score lines. And even Chicago Fire's lost to Man United 1-3. Not a horrible scoreline. So yes, MLS versus the Mexican and European teams during the friendlies have been in total 2-2-13. 2 wins, two draws, and 13 losses. But what we're not looking at is that even though most of these games were played by reserves on the MLS side for the second half, I mean, that's something you have to take into account in this. It's and it is getting MLS exposure around the world. It's getting us exposure to American fans that follow Ajax and Real Madrid and Man City and Man United here in the United States. So it's giving us some exposure. It's giving the game exposure. So I don't think I think if you're gonna and you know me, I was just crushing these World Football Challenges a week ago. But the more that I actually examine the numbers, the real facts, the more I say to myself, this isn't as bad as we all think it is.
Well, and I want to specify so people don't jump down our throats. We do understand that these score lines being close. We understand that these teams are in preseason form. They're just coming off their breaks. And we understand that, even at halftime, all these big teams are throwing in, 5, 6, 7, 8 new players onto the field at any given time.
Right.
But I think what we have to realize is that we do acknowledge the fact that we are seeing the level of the difference in talent, overall technical and overall tactical ability compared to our European counterparts.
These teams are deeper. Right.
It seems like a ridiculous thing to actually have to come out and say, but I just want to state that we do acknowledge all this.
Yeah.
But it is still good to see all the teams that are doing well against these European powerhouses, that are keeping it close, that are actually outperforming them at certain times. This is a positive to see. It just doesn't mean that we're there or we're going to be there. It is a glorified friendly, and we're holding our own for the most part.
Right. And then when you look at the fact that when you're talking about less than awesome teams, like Everton, they're a mid-table team in the EPL, usually, and the Philadelphia beat them 1-0. San Jose beat West Brom. LA Galaxy tied Man City today. Screw that shootout. That was stupid. No one cares about the shootout. Kansas City.
I'm point it out, by the way. That's got to be the dumbest thing ever. Why enforce a shootout? I don't know.
And then that's without extra time. You know what? If they tie 1-1, just call it a game. I know a lot of Americans like the shootouts, so you got to give it to them. But in Kansas City, they drew Newcastle 0-0. I think, and no one's saying Kansas City is one of the best MLS teams. I can tell you that much. So, and then you look at, even funnier, Brett, the USL played Bolton and Newcastle.
Tampa Bay FC.
Yeah, and guess what? They have a better record than MLS. They are 2 wins and 1 loss because Orlando and Tampa Bay combined in all the friendlies with the USL, they beat both Bolton and Newcastle. So, what does that tell you? Maybe... is that USL or are they NASL teams? They're division. I can't. Regardless, I
Makes
can't.
no sense at this point to debate that aspect of it. But.
Yeah, at this point, I can't remember the difference between USL and NASL teams anymore.